happy to be with you today, and really on behalf of the UN Development Coordination Office, I would like to thank the Journalists and Writers Foundation for their kind invitation and organizing this really very important SDG conference in the margins of the UN General Assembly 78. I would like also to welcome your global partners and delegations, journalists, human rights defenders, civil society organizations, academics, who are coming from, as you said, around 15 countries. This is really reflects the interest and commitment by civil society towards the SDGs. Also, adding to this, our virtual participants who are joining from many countries around the globe. So greetings to you all from the UN Development Coordination Office. As majority of you might know, the DCO, UN Development Coordination Office, oversees the whole UN development system with around 132 United Nations country teams in the field and 5 regional offices. This happened after the UN development system reform. As you all know, in 2015, the world leaders made a historic global promise to secure the human rights and well-being of everyone on a healthy, prosperous planet when they agreed on the 2030 agenda. This promise, which we called the agenda, is now in its halfway to its 2030 deadline, is now in deep danger. Instead of progressing towards the 2030 goals, development progress is now reversing under the combined impacts of climate disasters, conflicts, economic downturn, and remaining COVID-19 effects, as many of you mentioned in your introductory remarks. Tens of millions have fallen into poverty. Over 110 million people are forcibly displaced. Inequalities have worsened, strikingly also for women and girls. More people are being denied health care and education. The climate crisis is causing destruction on lives and livelihoods. This collective failure, and I am not creating this as my new definition, it's also mentioned by the UN Secretary General in his SDG report. This collective failure will impact every country and all of us. But of course, the burden falls most heavily on developing countries and the world's poorest and most vulnerable people. Thus, we have to take an urgent action now. And the SDG Summit is a vital opportunity to take action and break through to a better world. The SDG Summit is also a moment to recommit to a vision of the future that ensures no one is left behind and fulfillment of human rights for all without any kind of discrimination. To be able to face these challenges, fundamental shifts in commitments, solidarity, financing, and action must put us back on track to end poverty and inequalities, realize just societies, and reset a balanced relationship with our natural world. The world leaders who are gathering in New York these days must choose to fulfill the promise or the promises they have made and to respect their obligations and commitments they made since 2015. And we have to say that there is no place to failure. As I was asked in this panel to try to summarize, because actually it's not easy to summarize the key issues and the key challenges, but I'll try my best and what are some of the proposed recommendations. And this is all stipulated clearly in the Sustainable Development Goals Report 2023, which stipulates that the SDGs are in peril. The world has entered an age of polycrisis, and hard-earned SDG progress is threatened by the climate crisis, conflict, gloomy economic outlook, and lingering COVID-19 effects. It sounds the alarm and urgently calls for redoubled efforts to get the goals back on track. Sounding the alarm, the world faces big messes across the goals by 2030 in the absence of a significant acceleration. And here, several of you in your introductory remarks mentioned that in the preliminary assessment of the 140 targets for which data is available, they're still facing a challenge on data issues, but shows that 12% are on track out of the 140. More than half, although showing some progress, are moderately or severely off track. And some 30% have either seen no movement or regressed below the 2015 baseline. The number of people living in extreme poverty rose for the first time in a generation with the onset of COVID-19. For the first time in 3 decades, progress in key areas such as childhood vaccination and income inequality between countries has reversed. It presents trends persist by 2030. A staggering 575 million people will remain trapped in extreme poverty, and 84 million children will be out of school. It will take almost or nearly 300 years to close the gender gaps in legal protection and eliminate discriminatory laws and end child marriage. We are at war with ourselves and the nature. The climate crisis is worsening as greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise. Global temperature is likely to reach the critical 1.5 degrees, tipping point above the pre-industrial level by 2035. Heat waves, droughts, flooding, and wildfires have become far too frequent. Rising sea levels are already threatening hundreds of millions of people in the coastal communities. Developing countries and the world's poorest are the most vulnerable and bearing the brunt. The report also shows that while the lack of SDG progress is universal, it is often the world's poorest and most vulnerable people who are bearing the brunt of the consequences of this. Developing countries are also disproportionately affected, all while their voices is not fairly represented in the global governance architecture. And some of you talked also about the reform of the UN system and the Security Council, etc. And in international financial institutions as well. And this must change now, and there's no time or there's no opportunity for the ledger of time. We must make the next 7 years count. Achieving the SDGs depends on it. We can still turn things around. Since 2015, there has been some improvements in key areas, including poverty reduction, child mortality, electricity access, and the battle against certain diseases. We must say that if strong political will is matched with technologies and resources and knowledge which is now available, we can enable a breakthrough for a better future. The report inspires hope by showcasing the progress the world has made and the potential for further advancements. We must enact a rescue plan for people and the planet. We must be ambitious to match the scope of challenges ahead. We must make a fundamental shifts in commitments, solidarity, financing, and actions are needed to put us back on track. The political declaration adopted by the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, which I think it was 2 days ago, ensures a common understanding among member states to advance the transformative actions leading up to the SDG targets by 2030. The political declaration represents the beginning of a new phase, so we cannot consider it alone is enough, but it is a beginning of a new phase of accelerated implementation of the 2030 agenda, which will need, of course, to be complemented by continuous high-level political guidance and national and local actions. This is an opportunity for all of us, citizens, journalists, civil society organizations, the private sector, to advocate for the urgency, ambition, and action to realize the goals. The 2030 Agenda remains the clearest blueprint of humanity's highest aspirations. The SDGs are a blueprint for a more resilient, peaceful, and inclusive future. When historians write about the 21st century, they will judge the leaders and policymakers by whether they have succeeded in transforming this blueprint into reality. It is now up to all of us to ensure that the global goals are achieved in full and on time. Thank you very much.